Well, in linguistics, semantics, we don't talk about archetypes, but we do very much talk about prototypes. And the way I introduce that notion in my class is usually by asking the students a very simple question out of the blue, which means not exactly out of the blue, but that is after having exposed the classical theories of lexical semantics, that is the theory of the meaning of words, and those classical stories are all about sets of necessary and sufficient conditions. For example, a chair, how do you define a chair? It's sort of kind of a dictionary exercise. So a chair is an object that serves a certain function and has a certain number of properties that you can list, and that identifies the chair. And you can move on and go on and see the structuring of the meaning, because a chair is somewhere in a bigger set, and that in that bigger set you've got another word which is seat, for example. Take a seat, could be a chair or whatever other kind of seat. And so you've got a structure of meaning there, which is basically explained in terms of necessary and sufficient conditions. And then, so next class is starting with a very, very simple question that I address to students. Can anyone tell me what the word bird means? What's a bird? So the immediate response that I have, so I say to the students, don't think too much, just give me the straightforward answer that comes to your mind. What's a bird? And so the answer is, a bird is an animal that flies. I guess everyone here has gotten this idea on the first sight. But then, of course, a bee is then a bird, and an ostrich is not a bird, as a penguin is not a bird. And then we start reflecting on that. So what do we have to add to this or to change in this definition? And then we talk about eggs, and we talk about, but of course, snakes, etc. And we talk about feathers. And of course, if you are a zoologist, you know that the defining feature of a bird is about feathers. But if you're a normal individual, you don't necessarily associate feathers with birds. As soon as one mentioned the penguin, which doesn't seem to have feathers, but rather is like hair. So the story goes on, and the result is that what we consider a bird is indeed the prototype of an animal that flies. So the first straightforward answer was right. And it's not just for birds. The interesting thing, the funny thing is that there's a whole story about the meaning of words and how this idea of a prototype in the mind was sort of discovered. It was discovered first by thinking about the difference of meanings in different cultures, and in particular, the difference of meanings of the words for colors. So I will make it very, very, very short, but the idea that prevailed until the late 60s was that the differences among languages were absolutely tremendous, enormous, incommensurable, so that you couldn't apply your concepts into another culture because of this difference in languages. And one key example of that was the difference in color naming. It's a very classical thing that. So when I start the class on color naming, I ask the students a very simple question. I ask them, who has studied Latin? Who has studied Greek in this class? Can anyone tell me, remind me, just sort of trick class. Can someone remind me the word for blue in Latin, please? Yeah. And of course, no one does. No one's able to do that because there's no word corresponding to blue, and there's a long story for this. But one day, two students, PhD students in Berkeley University, who went on field research, one in Mexico, the other one in Tahiti, studying native languages there, met again in the campus and exchanged ideas and experiences, and one of them said to the other, but you know what, one thing was very surprising, which says the naming of colors in that culture, Tzetalt, Mexico, is rather similar to our own, after all, but I would have expected so different things, but it's quite similar, except for a few things. And then the other one said, but it's a very funny experience because I had the same experience in Tahiti, very similar things, and they decided to perform a very wide linguistic inquiry that became a landmark in linguistic studies, and discovered that there is a common pattern across languages. Despite the appearances, there is a common pattern of naming colors. But how can we decide that? Could they find that? They found out that actually you have to focus on one particular prototype of shade if you want to identify this recurring pattern. So, for example, one word in one language can mean a lot of different colors, a span of colors. But when you ask people what's the best example for that, the color that you name that way, you fall upon the same or similar prototypes across cultures. And that's the start of the whole story of the semantics of prototypes that was very much investigated and extended to lots of domains across languages. It's not a stable theory, it has its defects, but it's the first step about understanding language as something more flexible and related to prototypes and archetypes. Of course, then when it comes to the use of language, how do we use it? If you want, we can think of these prototypes as sort of unconscious shared background elements on which we build upon. So a similar story can be taken on sentences, not individual words, but also sentences. They all match a certain kind of pattern, and that's also be shown to be true with some specificities, but true universally. So there is something universal in there. And there's also something universal in the way we use language. And even despite, of course, very important, interesting intercultural differences, but there are underlying patterns. Also, how we build stories with similar patterns of complications and resolutions, and how we do poetry. That is, for example, that is playing with those archetypes, prototypes, patterns, formal things. We want to, for example, a poet would like to stick to certain formal rules, to adhere to a certain pattern, and raise expectations, and then use the liberty make use of their own formal liberty to break some other level of patterns, other level of so not obeying to one kind of pattern, but still sticking to another one, which is playing with the addressee's expectations. And so it's the same thing about narratives, plots, and everything. So playing with the addressee's expectations and breaking them to create new things, new thoughts, new perceptions. That's the way art goes also. Play with the forms, change something in the expected results, and have someone consider things differently. Thank you for your attention.